The mountains can be brutal. They don't care who you are, how much experience you have, or how strong your love is. If you make a mistake, there is no second chance. The mountain is indifferent to dreams and passions and flesh and blood. The mountain rules all. Today, we're going to cover some heartbreaking love stories of people lost in the mountains together, lost forever, frozen in time. I've spent years climbing and filming in the mountains, from Mount Everest in the Himalaya to Gasherbrum 2 in Pakistan, in Alaska and South America, and I've seen firsthand how things can go wrong, and when they do, how tragic it can be. And what I've learned is that when two people climb together, they form an inseparable bond. Some of them have become partners in life, adventurers forever. And when they embark on a dangerous mission to climb a mountain, they risk their lives together as one. In this video, we're going to look at 3 tragic stories of couples who took on the mountains together. The Sleeping Beauty of Everest, Francys Arsentiev and her husband Sergei, Maurice and Liliane Barrard on K2, and Hilaree Nelson and Jim Morrison on Manaslu. These people were the world's best at what they did, and only one remains, showing that even the best are not immune to the power of the mountain. I suppose it gets down to the bigger question of why climbers, mountaineers, would risk everything for the opportunity of taking on a mountain, for the idea of standing on the summit. I do know that deep bonds are formed in the mountains, something not unlike what a soldier might feel at war. However, in the mountains, we're taking on these mountains willingly, not like the true hero stories of soldiers who go to war to fight for their country and their cause. But these bonds are no less still extremely strong. And here, these 3 stories are stories frozen in time, lovers gone to the mountains, consumed by their passions, never to come home. The first story is about Francys and Sergei Arsentiev, who endeavored to climb Mount Everest in 1998 without the use of bottled oxygen. Francys Arsentiev has been referred to after her passing as the Sleeping Beauty of Mount Everest, certainly one of the most famous or infamous corpses on the mountain. They were a couple bound by love for each other, but also a deep love of the mountains. Sergei was a Russian mountaineer, and his wife Francys was an American. As it would turn out, during this expedition, Francys would indeed become the first American woman to climb Mount Everest without the use of bottled oxygen, but the tragedy evolves after they reach the summit. On May 19th, they climbed up to 8,203 meters, Camp 6 on Mount Everest. This is on the north side of Mount Everest. That camp is at about 27,000 feet, the highest camp in the world, and higher than all but 4 of the mountains of the world at a camp alone. Sergei reported by radio on that day they were in good shape, and they were going to start their summit attempt on May 20th at 1 a.m. After having spent the night at their Camp 4, they started their summit attempt, but turned around at the first step when their headlamps failed. So on May 21st, they again stayed at their high camp, Camp 6, ascending only 50 to 100 meters before turning around yet again. And after these 2 aborted attempts on the summit, they began a final ascent on the 22nd of May. No doubt they must have been completely spent. When a person endeavors to climb Mount Everest without the use of bottled oxygen, every minute at altitude is crucial, and they had been up in the death zone for days at this time. And so because they were climbing without bottled oxygen, they moved very, very slowly and summited dangerously late in the day. And as a result, they were forced to spend yet another night above 8,000 meters. And during the course of the evening, the two became separated. Just how, I do not know. Whether they were endeavoring to make their way down the mountain or not is unknown. Sergei did make his way down to camp the following morning, only to find that his wife, Francys, had not yet arrived. Realizing she had to be somewhere dangerously high on the mountain, he set off to find her, carrying an oxygen tank and medicine for his beloved wife. Now, details of what took place next are uncertain, but the most plausible accounts suggest that on the morning of May 23rd, Francys Arsentiev was encountered by an Uzbek team that was climbing the final few hundred meters to the summit. She appeared to be half conscious. These people were going by her and actually thought originally that she was a dead body, but because there was some movement, they were shocked to see that Francys was still alive. She had been certainly affected by total oxygen deprivation and frostbite from the looks of what they observed, and she was unable to move on her own. They attended to her with oxygen and carried her down as far as they could until, totally depleted of their own oxygen, they became so fatigued that they decided that they had to abort the effort of trying to save her life to try to save their own lives. And Francys, she was, yes, still alive, and the Uzbek climbers made their way down to camp that evening when they encountered Sergei on his way back up to Francys, and this is the last time that Sergei would ever be seen alive. On the morning of May 24th, Briton Ian Woodall and South African Kathy O'Dowd and several more Uzbeks encountered Francys Arsentiev while on their way to the summit. She was found exactly where she had been left the evening before. Sergei's ice axe and rope were identified nearby, but he was nowhere to be found. And what happened here is remarkable because both Woodall and O'Dowd called off their summit attempts at that time to try to offer some comfort and maybe even rescue Francys. They were with her for more than an hour, but because of her absolutely abysmal condition, the perilous location, this is the north face of Mount Everest, and very cold weather, they were forced to abandon her and leave to descend to their camp to save their own lives. And tragically, the last words that were uttered out of Francys Arsentiev's mouth were, "Don't leave me alone, please." Obviously, a truly gut-wrenching situation for Woodall and O'Dowd, who had no choice but to depart and get down to camp for their own physical safety. Francys Arsentiev, soon to be called the Sleeping Beauty of Mount Everest, died where they had found her, lying on her side, still clipped into the rope. She was aged 40. She had a son at home. The mysterious disappearance of Sergei, her husband, was solved the following year when Jake Norton, a colleague of mine in the 1999 Mallory and Irvin research expedition, discovered Sergei's body lower on the mountain's face, apparently having died from a fall while attempting to rescue Francys. Members of our team also encountered Francys herself, still clipped into the rope, all of her equipment with her. And in a successive year, Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd returned. They wrapped Francys in an American flag, tucked a teddy bear under her arm, whispered a message into her ear, and gently pushed her over the edge, surrendering her to the mountain, out of sight of other climbers making their way to the summit. The next story is equally tragic, another love story Maurice and Liliane Barrard, truly two of the most remarkable mountaineers of their era. In 1986 on K2, they joined an incredible team of Wanda Rutkowitz, one of the great women mountaineers of all time, and Michael Parmentier. They teamed up for a summit bid, and that summer on K2 was known as the Black Summer of 1986. It saw 13 deaths on the mountain and only 27 summits on K2, nearly 50% mortality rate on the mountain of summits to deaths. And during that Black Summer, many expeditions shared their own number of fatalities and tragedies. Maurice and Liliane Barrard met while climbing in South Africa. They had previously worked mainly in teaching, but they billed themselves as the world's highest couple. They successfully climbed Gasherbrum 2 in Pakistan, and in 1982, with Liliane's brother, they climbed Nanga Parbat, where she became the first female to climb that mountain. In 1986, they put their finances together to go take on K2. The expedition started off very inauspiciously, as when they were leaving a taxi, they inadvertently left their wallet with all of their money for the expedition in the taxi, and they never got that money back, but nonetheless were able to team up with Rutkowitz and Parmentier for their expedition and make a go of the mountain. The Barrard's expedition ascended the mountain very slowly. They spent nights at 6,300 meters, 7,100, 7,700, 7,900, and then 8,300 meters respectively on the climb. And then on their last night before their summit attempt, they bivouacked with a tent but no sleeping bags. And then with Rutkowitz and Parmentier, they all summited successfully by 11 o'clock on June 23rd. Wanda Rutkowitz ultimately became the first woman ever to summit K2, and Liliane Barrard was second by only 30 minutes. They both summited the mountain without the use of supplemental oxygen. And then together, all four of them, the Barrards, Rutkowitz, and Parmentier, descended as far as the bivouac site from the night before near the Bottleneck, which is the notorious treacherous terrain feature at around 8,300 meters. Parmentier decided to descend first to try to borrow stove fuel from a nearby pair of Basque climbers, and the others descended sometime after him. Rutkowitz did ultimately catch up with Parmentier and accompanied him all the way back down to the French Camp 3, for the most part well into the safety zone. Rutkowitz and the Basques continued on down the mountain, but Michael Parmentier waited for the Barrards to reach Camp 3, but the weather was deteriorating. A French climber climbing with an Italian expedition, Benoit Chamoux, tried to convince Parmentier to come down without success and left him a radio before turning around and heading back down to base camp. Eventually, Parmentier, who had tried to wait for some sign of the Barrards, began to descend in complete whiteout conditions, gale force winds, and he was eventually guided down the mountainside via radio directions from base camp, who were watching him from below based on the few landmarks that he should be looking for in this blizzard-like conditions. Rutkowitz, who was suffering from frostbite, and Parmentier, they reached base camp alive, but the Barrards were never seen again. The morning after summiting, Maurice had been very, very tired, and he and Liliane had left their tent after their climbing partners. It was windy, visibility was poor. The most likely scenario is that the Barrards wandered off the route in the storm and fell or collapsed from exhaustion and possible hypoxia. About a month after they disappeared, a South Korean team found Liliane's body on a snowfield at around 5,300 meters, which was 3,000 meters lower than where she had last been seen. And Maurice's body was not found until 1998 on the glacier just above base camp. Both are now buried at the Gilkey Memorial at the base of K2. Certainly another tragic story of lovers lost in the mountains. And now love, loss, and the final descent of Hilaree Nelson with her life partner, Jim Morrison. These two were a power couple in high altitude ski mountaineering. They had successfully skied Lhotse and had skied throughout the Himalayas together. Their love was completely built on adventure. And the tragic irony of this is that Jim Morrison had lost his family to a tragic plane accident. His wife and two children died in 2011, and 4 days after that crash, Morrison said at the funeral, quote, "I don't really have a purpose anymore. I can either take my own life or I can live life in their honor. And I don't think the first will make them proud of me, so I've decided to do the second." And so for Hilaree Nelson and Jim Morrison, skiing was not a choice, it was everything. And in 2018, they ultimately did make history by doing the first ski descent of Lhotse, the fourth highest mountain in the world. Hilaree Nelson grew up in the Seattle area and she started skiing at Stevens Pass. She started skiing when she was 3. Both of them were North Face athletes. Hilaree was the mother of 2 sons and she lived in Telluride. She had been an expedition member on over 40 expeditions and had first ski descents on Baffin and South Georgia Islands. Morrison himself had spent his entire life skiing and climbing in the Sierra Nevadas. He and his brother John was also an accomplished mountain athlete, grew up 3 hours from Squaw Valley. In the post-monsoon season of 2022 on Manaslu, Nelson and Morrison went there with the idea to do the ski descent of the mountain. They did reach the summit together and began skiing down. Now you can see these pictures, just how absolutely steep this is, which swept her off her feet. Jim Morrison spoke on his Instagram page about what that experience was like for him, sharing his deep inner sadness and pain with the world when he wrote, "On September 26th at 10:42 a.m., we reached the true summit of Manaslu in tough conditions." He said, "We quickly transitioned from climbing to skiing in cold wind with a plan to ski around the corner and regroup with our Sherpa team. I skied first, and after a few turns, Hilaree followed and started a small avalanche. She was swept off her feet and carried down a narrow slope down the south side, opposite from the climbing route. I did everything I could to locate her, but was unable to go down the face as I hoped to find her alive and live my life with her." This story gripped many people in the mountaineering community, as did the previous 2 stories of this video. However, in this day and age, Morrison and Nelson were well known in the mountaineering and ski realm, being very popular North Face athletes. We observed, along with Jim, and the world mourned with him, the loss of the beloved Hilaree Nelson, who was loved and deeply admired by so many people and an example to many women following in her footsteps. In Jim Morrison's post from Kathmandu, he wrote, "There are no words to describe the love for this woman, my life partner, my lover, my best friend, and my mountain partner. She has been the beacon of light in my life, day in and day out. My loss is indescribable, and I am focused on her children and their steps forward. Hilaree Nelson is the most inspiring person in life, and now her energy will guide our collective souls. Peace be with us all. Pray for her family and community, which is broadly stretched across our planet. I'm devastated by the loss of her." That's Jim Morrison writing about his beloved Hilaree Nelson. Is there anything that we can take from these absolutely devastating stories? In the end, these couples shared everything together, their dreams, their adventures, as well as their final moments. Their stories remind us that love can reach the highest pinnacles, but the mountains will always decide who comes back down. Thanks for watching. Do somebody a kind deed today. Don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one tiny step at a time. Peace be with you.